Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, that is Connor, and today we are going to talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Episode 1 and 2 technically. This is called Emissary. It is the premiere double episode of Deep Space Nine, and if you've stumbled onto this and haven't seen any of our content before, we started Star Trek, the original series, in January of 2017, and we've been going more or less weekly with, the odd needed break here or there. We've worked through original series, we finished that. We are on season 6 of The Next Generation, and this is actually where Deep Space Nine slots in, where it started when they were originally airing, and we're going to be going through the original air date order of both shows now, and then eventually, obviously, Next Gen will finish, and then Voyager will come in. But this is a big milestone for us, because we're finally starting the third show.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming.
I was really excited today to watch this, I was like, oh, it's a new one. Finally, get a new show after all this time.
It has been a long time, right? 4+ years, 4.5.
So, yeah, it took us 2 years to do original series, more or less. So, yeah, but 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, four or so years, yeah, since we started Next Gen. And it makes sense that's taken a long time. It's, it's a long show. It's 7 seasons. We're on season 6, but it was just kind of exciting. Like, oh, is it? And obviously we've had a new Trek, as in, Discovery and things like that, but this was kind of exciting because it was like, oh, it's the next big piece of the puzzle. And this was the first one, even though I'd heard a lot of things. I had seen the movies for both the original and Next Gen crew. I'd seen a few episodes of both shows. Going into this, like, this was
kind of flying blind.
Yeah, it was completely fresh outside of the fact that I know it's meant to be very good, and a lot of people call it their favorite, by the end. So I'm excited, and I also know there's the comparisons to Babylon 5, which I've funnily enough been watching with Tara for the past couple of years. So comparisons, if they should be made, I'll have them at the ready. But obviously I'm going in with a fair bit of excitement and anticipation.
Yeah, it was. We got a new opening theme.
We do, and this is the thing. I've never seen an episode of Voyager, but Voyager's main theme I've heard, and it's really good.
I have heard this theme before. I actually did a lecture on, had a lecture on this theme, and I'd kind of forgotten until I heard it when I was watching. I was like, and it all kind of came back to me, and it immediately told me a lot about this show. Despite I have general awareness of kind of what the show is. But even if I didn't, telling me, that theme goes, oh yeah, it's going to be war, military kind of themed.
It definitely sounds more serious than Next Gen.
It's a brass fanfare. It's very typical. Here's your soldier theme.
I will say it's the hardest one to sing out of the 4 first Trek shows. The only bit I can really kind of hear in my head is do 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 do. Because it does that halfway through.
Yeah.
Whereas Voyager, Next Gen, and original series, I can sit and do all those if you want me to. You don't want me to, but I could.
No, we really don't.
Which, by the way, when you eventually get a chance to check out Strange New Worlds, it's a really nice, sort of new take on the original series theme.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing that. I quite like Discovery's theme. I know I know some people don't, but I think it's quite a nice little piece of music.
It's not bad. It's a little. I definitely prefer Strange New Worlds music as a kind of modern take on old Trek, but it's just all about taste, really. So yeah, Deep Space Nine. Obviously, it's set in a space station, and whereas with Next Generation, obviously the idea was, okay, this is just a new version of classic Star Trek, and obviously there's a lot of things that are different. There's a lot of things that are arguably just better. Ultimately, though, the idea was to take the same concept as the original series and just do a new version of it on the Enterprise. They're on the same ship name. It's the idea as a crew. You're doing, to go out and discovering things. You're all that stuff. That's the idea with this show is this is going to be Star Trek in universe, same time period as Next Generation, but it's got a different concept. We're on a space station, and it's going to have its own kind of corner of mythology that it's going to mostly deal with. And some of that's been introduced in Next Gen. Obviously the Cardassians and the Bajorans were introduced in that show. We've talked about that in the build up to this because we'd heard in passing they're going to be big parts of Deep Space Nine, but this is kind of its own thing, and I was very excited to watch it. The only minor negative thing I'm going to say right at the start of this, just get it out of the way, is that when I started watching this, I did sort of sigh and go, why have you bastards not restored this in 1080p?
I did the same, where even though like I've known that it's not, in 1080p, like I kind of forgot until I started watching it.
It's when you see Picard, especially.
Saw it, I was like, oh yeah.
It's when you see Picard, especially, because we're so used to seeing him in like pristine quality, and then it's like, oh god, what is the standard definition?
Yeah.
No.
I don't remember the last time I watched anything in standard definition.
It's been a while.
Genuinely don't.
What's funny actually is when I started doing Babylon 5, it was in standard definition, and then we were just at the end of season 1, or was it season 2? I don't know, but somewhere along the way, it was when they brought out the remasters, so everything updated and changed over. So I actually switched to the HD part way through.
I don't think we're going to get that lucky.
I don't know if they do the same thing that Warner's have been doing with shows like Babylon 5 and Lois and Clark, where they don't do the effects again, but all of the footage that's just the actors on set can be upgraded, then they might.
They could,
because it's cheaper.
They've done that even with like more recent shows.
Sure, yeah.
Firefly, for example, Smallville. Just in terms of just things that had a lot of effects in them, but
yeah,
costly, right, to redo all that. But the rest of it, yeah, it's doable.
I think what's funny is I don't hear many people are begging for Voyager per se, but Deep Space Nine's got a very passionate fan base, and I feel like they all want they want Deep Space Nine to get the remastered treatment. And I'm happy to split the difference and say, give me the one where you don't redo the effects, but just up the quality so that it looks much nicer.
That would be ideal.
But maybe it'll come. Knowing our luck, it'll be announced right after we finish. And
it's just an excuse to rewatch it down the line, though.
It is, yes. Hopefully, I like it enough that I'll want to come back. And watch
that
it.
is assuming that.
Yeah, that's the hope. But I wanted to get away. I'll never talk about it again. It was just obviously this is the first episode, so the transition after watching both original series and Next Gen, like beautifully restored to like this excellent. Like I almost took it for granted at a certain point where I didn't even necessarily sit and think, oh, it's amazing what they've done to Next Gen to make it look this good. And then I watch episode 1 of this and I'm like, oh, this is how Next Gen looked before. Okay, now I'm impressed.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, sure, you're like, yeah, it looks good, it looks fine. You don't think too much about it.
Yeah,
and then you see the comparison, you're like, oh, yeah, no, they put work into that.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, like I was used to it after a few minutes. So you get into it and you go along with it and it's fine. But yes, so we have new characters to talk about. We have the premise of the show. We have the plot of this first couple episodes, the themes that it's poking at, the things that it sets up. The character who I think was maybe going to be Ensign Ro had the actress wanted to join the show, but isn't. And that's okay. That's cool. I'm sure we'll learn to love Kira in time. Have to learn all these new names, and I don't think I'm too bad. I'll tell you, the number one surprising thing to me in this show that I was not expecting in any way was what I'm going to refer to as TH2O, which is the very watery T1000 character. I did not know that was coming.
Did you not?
No. I mean, I knew like the actor who's like an alien. I mean, the actor's not an alien, but the character's an alien, right? I've seen his image, right? So I knew this character was there. But when someone throws the thing at his head and he goes all watery and jelly-like, and it goes through him, I was like, wait, what? Someone has those powers in this? What the hell? That was a big shock to me. So,
and it is something that they kind of don't address for a long time in the episode.
Oh yeah. Which I actually thought was quite bold, because when he eventually does say something about it, I was like, oh, I'm more interested now, because you said, because he's like, oh, he's basically like the Clark Kent of Bajor, where he's been raised with Bajorans, but he doesn't actually know where he comes from or why he has these powers. And I'm like, I'm interested. That's cool.
Up till that point of the episode, you're just like, all right, I guess he's just an alien with these powers. Sure, whatever. You don't think too much about it. They're not stopping to explain it at any point until it's relevant to that character and where the plot is at that point. And it's like, oh, this is a mystery to them as well.
Yeah. So that was kind of neat. His name's Odo. He is the security chief. I don't know if that's technically the exact title, but that's essentially what he is.
They call him Constable a lot.
Yeah, Constables, yeah, is what he goes by. But he's the security chief on the station. We have him. Obviously, we have Captain, or Commander is the actual rank, Cisco. And I do know that eventually he's going to have a goatee and he's going to be bald. And people say that's when the show really takes off. Much like Riker getting the beard. So we got that to look forward to. But we got hair and no beard right now. And we're interested. And we'll talk a lot about him, of course, in a minute, because he's got obviously a lot of backstory and stuff that the episode
He is
gets
very
into.
much the main character of this episode.
Oh, for sure, yeah. We have Terry Farrell's character. I know the actress, but she plays a Trill character called Dax. So that's cool. There's another Doctor character, Bashir, who, I'll be honest, that's the only name that I didn't really recognize from the episode, because I don't think he gets mentioned in it. He's a fairly minor part of this first pair of episodes. He's got a couple of like worried moments where he's like concerned, and that's kind of what he's got. Obviously, we have O'Brien, which is exciting. That he's now a main character on a show, and we will get into some of that. And we have Quark, who of course is going to be my free Buffy reference card every episode.
No. You get it once.
This is Principal Snyder.
One time.
Yeah, good luck with that.
One-time use. You can't use the same actor, especially when it's a main cast member. Or I mean, maybe recurring. I don't know quite what it is. But
I think he's a regular. I think he was in the in the opening titles at least.
Yeah, I think he might have been.
Because I noticed his name. So you got him, and that's kind of your main group. Is those bunch. So
we didn't mention Quark is our resident Ferengi.
Yes, he's the Ferengi who is actually in charge of kind of they had a name for it in the episode. It's marketplace, but it's also the casino and like the bars and stuff. It's just like the social like
the high street.
The high street, yeah, the high street of the space station.
Essentially, they did have a different name for it.
Yeah,
but it's essentially what it is. Yeah,
they had a word for it. I forgot what the word is now, but but he's kind of like asked, because this is the thing. This is stuff that I didn't know. This was the cool thing about watching this episode. There's so much mythology that's thrown at you in this first one. I didn't know that this was actually a Cardassian station that they've abandoned, because the Cardassians have effectively stripped Bajor. They controlled Bajor for a long time, and they effectively were an occupying force and have stripped it bare of any valuable resource, natural or otherwise, and they're now left partly because they've been fought off, but partly it sounds like they kind of just were willing to give it up now because we've got everything. Like, there's nothing worth staying around for anymore. And the Federation have stepped in to have a presence in this part of space, this sector, and they're taking over this station. And so when they arrive, it's in a bit of a shit state. The Cardassians kind of stripped the station of all the valuable like resources. So O'Brien's having to fix all of the systems, and everything's not working. There's like just wreckage everywhere. It starts in a rough place.
Yeah.
So
it's not that much better by the end.
Not by the end. I'm sure it's going to be cleaned up fairly quickly.
Yeah.
But it was an interesting start, just to sort of like, okay, so this isn't like a Federation built station. This is like, so because even later on, like O'Brien's like, I don't know how to do this with Cardassian tech, and he's like trying to like work out the transporter.
He is fighting with the tech a lot this episode.
Oh yeah, there's a great bit later on where they sort of like says, "Hey, we need to have a talk, computer, you and I," because it doubts him at one point. She's like, "I don't recommend this."
Overrules him as well at one point.
Yeah, he's like, "I'm not having this. We're not having this right now." So that's super interesting. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff with the Bajors and Cardassians to talk about. I think we'll start with Cisco though. We'll start with his backstory because I was expecting it to start by telling us something about the Cardassians or something like that, and it actually started with the Borg, and it started specifically with the end of season 3, start of season 4 in Next Gen, and we find out that Cisco's wife was killed fighting the Borg when Picard was Locutus and was kind of the face of the Borg at the time. So it gives Cisco a pretty, he's got a bit of a beef with Picard. He's not really comfortable around him, and
understandably.
Oh yeah. I think what I love about their interactions this episode, because Picard guest stars in this first one, the Enterprise is kind of docked there, and he goes to see him eventually, and he's kind of putting it off. And what's funny is that even though it showed you in the opening, it didn't quite click until he looked at him. And I went, "Oh yeah," because this is the face of the man that when his wife died. Like that, it didn't quite click those two things together in my head until they were in the same room. But we get this flashback at the start where we see him like trying to like save his wife, and like the doctor or whoever who's there is like, no, like, she's already dead. Like we have to go. So the fact that we have a captain with a son, he's got a kid, is obviously very different from Picard and Kirk right away.
Yeah,
something different.
Definitely is the immediate parallel is obviously Wesley Crusher.
Yes. Will he live up to the legacy of Wesley Crusher?
Can anyone?
Oh, I did the outro for this show. God damn it! I just realised. Jake, you better give me some gold soon. It's on you, Jake. It's all on you. But
are you using like bespoke outros for all the different modern Trek shows as well?
Yeah, kind of. I struggled a little bit. I think I actually just went back to the Wesley one for a couple at the end of Picard because there was some jokes to be made without getting into details. Yeah. But yeah, so we get this flashback and we come back to present day. We get an introduction to Sisko and his son. They're on a holodeck, and the son doesn't really want to go to Deep Space Nine because it sounds like a shithole. And we find out quite quickly that Sisko himself's not even that enthused. He even says to Picard that maybe he should look for a replacement. They're very hostile. I mean, Picard's very friendly to start with. Sisko kind of turns it into more of a hostile conversation as it goes on. I think what I liked about it, though, is that because we start the episode with Sisko, and we spend time with him, getting to know him a little bit before we get this interaction, is that even though we've been with Picard for 6 years, like, I didn't just immediately side with Picard in the conversation.
I don't think Picard sides with Picard.
Yeah.
There's the bit where he's like, "Oh yeah, oh, good to see you again," or something, and he's like, "Oh, have we met?" And he's like, "Yeah, in battle." And Picard's like, yes,
yeah, because he names the date. Yeah, he names the fight, so he knows exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah, and he knows. I'm sure he knows the outcome of exactly what happened there.
Yeah,
and he feels uncomfortable immediately.
I think what I like about this, I mean, I keep calling him Captain because that's effectively what he was in the show, but again, I know he's not called Captain. I think what I like about Sisko so far is that he is a bit of a tougher character to like nail down. I think compared to, I think Picard right from the get go, you get who he is. I think Kirk is a relatively simple character. I think so far Sisko, to me, after just this double episode, he has so many ups and downs in this episode of, when he's like hostile with certain people, or he's more joyful with others, or he's got a different attitude with different things. Like, he feels a bit more complex as a character.
I think that's definitely fair to say, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely got quite a lot going on. It gives us some backstory, not everything, I'm sure, but it definitely gives us enough to be getting on with and giving us a few different layers to who he is. Yeah,
and I think the performance is very interesting, actually, because I think he does this thing where he'll go very like commanding at times, very loud, very broad voice kind of thing. But then there's other times where he'll give off this like silly little laugh in a couple of moments where it's very different. There's definitely a couple of moments with his son where he's a bit more joyful, which makes sense.
Any of the backstory flashback stuff with the wife.
Oh yeah, like that stuff on the beach. Obviously, we'll get into why we're seeing that later, but yeah, that's very different to like what we see in the rest of the episode.
Yeah.
So it is a very different captain, which I think is good. Like I think what's so great about watching this show, is that it's like of like what many consider the golden era for Star Trek, pretty much, but it's also completely new to us and fresh and different from Next Gen. So it has this really fresh feel to it, but also old school at the same time, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, it's kind of. I know we've mentioned this on the other shows, but this probably more than the others in that, like, I think you pick up more of the other shows through just cultural osmosis than probably this one. It's bizarre that this feels so fresh to us, given how, it's not new by any stretch of the imagination.
No. No, it's funny though, because like I can already see some parallels with Babylon 5. The idea that one race has been occupied another's planet for like a long time. That's something that's there at the start of Babylon 5, or referenced a lot from just having ended recently. And even the idea, obviously Star Trek has dealt with like godlike beings and beings that we don't understand that seem super powerful and different before, but this definitely feels like what they're setting up in this first episode is not just a one and done thing. This is going to be something that they're going to be playing with. This is like, I mean, I don't know if you got this impression, but I got super serialized vibes from this. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be standalone plots for episodes, but a lot of the stuff that's set up in this episode felt like stuff we're going to be revisiting as time goes on.
It definitely feels like it's the sort of stuff that, given the era of TV, will probably be a handful of times over the season at first. But it definitely feels primed to revisit a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, and some of the ideas are really fascinating. But so we get Sisko meeting some of the crew. His first interactions with Kira, the first officer, are interesting. You can kind of see how very Ensign Rowe. Obviously, there's some differences to make her different, but there's even a little joke from O'Brien, because we see O'Brien's the first person he talks to when he comes aboard the station. O'Brien has a little dig like, have you ever served with a female Bajoran before? It kind of just gives it's like, oh, no reason, sir. And it's just and it's almost like a little fishing line to us, the audience, of like, well, you've met Ensign Rowe, audience, so you've got an idea what to expect from this character. And sure enough, like I could imagine Ensign Rowe saying a lot of these lines and being angry in the same way that a lot of the Selly stuff with her is.
Yeah, and this is something that I imagine it's just holdover in the scripts from when they didn't know quite what it was going to be, and there's probably just some name changing going on.
Very possibly.
I imagine as the show goes on, she'll develop more into being fully fleshed out as her own kind of character.
Yeah. And we find out that now that this occupation has ended, like the Bajorans were united and they wanted to get rid of the Cardassians, but now a lot of old Civil War conflicts are starting to bubble up again. So like they kind of need to sort that, especially if they want to join the Federation, which some of them do. And I mean, Deep Space Nine and Sisko's job is kind of to try and prepare them for that in a lot of ways. So that's something that's set up, which I think is super interesting. You get a lot more, I think, of the Cardassian mentality, I think, in this as well. Even just the idea that they stripped the station before they left, and then when they show up again later, and like the attitude when Dukat comes in, who's the main Cardassian we get to know, and sort of has a sort of one-on-one with Sisko. It feels like, oh, you're going to be a regular antagonist. Like this isn't, just some villain of the week here.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like when after Sisko has the orb, and Dukat's like, hey, I know you've got that. He's keeping a lot of like tabs on what's going on. He is very well informed.
And to be fair, that actually lines up a lot with a lot of the stuff we just saw in Next Gen. Like this idea of like going into a room and them knowing already that stuff's going on because they're watching, they're listening, they've got sources.
Yeah,
it's very much their thing now all of a sudden. So that's cool. So actually, a couple of notes on the uniforms. So we see them in the traditional Next Gen uniforms a few times, but seemingly the uniform on the station is a little bit different. It's a lot more like Picard's jacket in that you've got the little bit of color at the top, sort of going across the shoulders, but then black from underneath. That seems to be the Federation or the Starfleet uniform on the station. However, the locals have their own uniform, because you see both Kira and Odo are wearing, I don't know if it's Bajoran clothes specifically, I assume it is, but what I liked about it is the color scheme is the same. You'll notice that Kira was in red, which is still, matching the red of Sisko and the command staff, and Odo was in gold, much like Worf would be in the same job on the Enterprise. So I like that little touch.
Yeah, it's something just to keep it consistent.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool because obviously Next Gen was set so much years later after the original series. It's kind of interesting to have another show that's set alongside the Next Gen now, where it's the same world, the characters can interact. I don't know how much of a crossover we're ever going to have in the next season and a half. Maybe there was one or two, I don't know, but
yeah, I would suspect not much. Maybe not even any. Maybe it is just this introduction.
Mm-hmm. It may just be, but it is. I think the character of Cisco, like being so complex, is almost like a signpost for the rest of the show. Because like from what I know, Deep Space Nine is a little bit more mature. It goes a little bit further with some of its ideas, and maybe that character's meant to sort of signal that in many ways.
I definitely think so. Yeah, and maybe it might not be a conscious decision to have done that, but I think it's just more indicative of the approach that they've taken in the writing.
Yeah. It's just like this is what we're doing, so we can already see signs of it in the character. Yeah, for sure. So he's actually friends with Dax, although Dax was in a different body last time they met, and because he calls her old man, and we even get a little flashback at one point, which is again related to the Orbs. We'll get into all that plot stuff in a minute, but we see
that's not that interesting in comparison to all the other new stuff.
The Orbs themselves aren't that interesting. I will say there's some very interesting ideas about this species that are in the wormhole that we're going to talk about. Especially since it's going to be this like constant like I'll just say it. Were you getting a little bit of a Expanse vibe from like, there's this new wormhole that's opened up to a new sector of the universe that we'll never be able to go to, the Gamma Quadrant, and this is now going to be like the port to go there, and now Deep Space Nine's like the gatekeeper of this port. Like, I was getting some Expanse vibes.
Oh, definitely, and
from that,
and Mass Effect stuff with the relays, right?
Yeah.
And again, this is where this.
And to be fair,
it's weird for us coming to this backwards, essentially, right?
I was just going to say, to be fair, this might have inspired both of those things.
It very likely did, yeah.
But obviously, we're coming at it from our perspective, so these are the things we're comparing it to. And the idea of like these more godlike beings, or beings that maybe, because I guess the whole thing is that the Bajorans, their religion's based on these orbs and these beings, and I'm sure we're going to learn more about this as time goes on. But then when Cisco and Co go into this wormhole and like he ends up sort of interacting with them, and they're this non-linear species, they don't experience time, they're confused by what time is, and he's trying to sort of like teach them what time is, like as they're sort of looking through his memories, and like they're all sort of intersecting, and there's all this going on. That's something Babylon, not necessarily this exact type of thing, but the idea of like godlike beings. But this idea that Bajor have like based their religion on them, but they're just this other species, right? And yeah, they are powerful in a sense, but they don't even really know about Bajor. It sounds like the orbs get sent by accident. It doesn't even seem like they knew they were sending them to a planet. From the sounds of it.
Pure chance, right?
Yeah, an accident. Someone flushed the wrong time warp toilet or something, and they spat out the wormhole. I don't know.
Yeah, they seem to have no real concept of the outside the wormhole. I mean, they're aware it exists, clearly, and they're aware that there is a threat to them, potentially. But they seem very unclear on kind of the reality of it. Yeah,
and they're non-corporeal because they keep calling Cisco a corporeal life form. So again, just very different. Yeah, so I loved all the stuff this set up though, which is ultimately learning from Cisco. They ultimately decide to seemingly let him go and will allow free travel through this wormhole to the Gamma Quadrant, but that could lead to some new things coming from the other side that we might explore down the line. I suspect that'll be some plots here or there, but. If nothing else, this the Cardassians have left, and there's a big rush in this episode. Kira tells O'Brien, "We need to move the station. We need to Bajor needs to clear that wormhole so that we've got a position of strength." And to go back to the Expanse again, I won't say anything spoilery, but it's a lot like the Belters needing something to like have a position of power, and
it definitely is, yeah,
and the system, and the civilization that they've got around them. So that's super cool. I think I really like that played by the end. Like immediately there was ideas being brought up in this episode where I was kind of like, I like all the potential like politics and like themes that are going to come out of this idea that like this is about Bajor having to sort out its own shit, but also trying to like elevate itself to be like a proper civilization in the galaxy with everyone else.
But there's definitely a question of how much do they need it, and how much is just they feel like they need it, right? As opposed to the actual reality of it.
And then, of course, the Cardassians come crawling back. Like they're racing for it themselves, and they're probably going to want the control back because now there's this. I mean, this might be potentially more valuable than anything they ever took from that planet, because this is this gateway to another part of space that no one from these the sectors that were all the show's been set in have ever been to, because the Gamma Quadrant's so far away. So, it's already bubbling with big ideas that are really cool.
It is, yeah. I'm really looking forward to seeing how it explores some of these.
As am I. And even just how it's exploring the idea of religion and sort of the truth behind it, but also doesn't necessarily negate what the Bajorans believe and the teachings they've taken from it. You know?
Yeah. It is interesting because Sisko has not a religious crisis, but he's very kind of like, hey, you should go see this religious leader, and he goes and he meets her, and it's this, maybe you need to be more open to the spiritual, and it's very much okay, he's definitely going to go on some sort of journey over this show, and it'll be really fascinating to see kind of that exploration of his character, I think.
Yeah, the main character arc for this two-parter is actually, she says to him, there's something wrong with your pa, which is kind of like his chi or something. I don't know, whatever you want to call it, right? His inner self. And when the aliens are looking through his memories and they go back to the night his wife died, they say, "But you're here." And they say that this is kind of the most prominent memory. This is where he seems to, like, his mind goes back to the most. And ultimately, the arc of the episode is him accepting that he is still there and that he's not moved on. So when early in the episode, when he's saying that he doesn't really want to be there and he's going to leave as quickly as he can, it's obvious that by the end he's going to change his mind on that.
Wouldn't be much of a show otherwise, right?
Exactly. But this is how he gets to that point: is that he is still living in this moment. He's still not moved on from this. He's still here, and he has to decide and choose to move on at some level.
I wonder how far into the show they choose to kind of fulfill that arc, because sure, you could drag that out over the whole show if you really wanted to. But I think it's more satisfying if it's a season or 2 seasons at most, and kind of seeing, and then what after that? What sort of man is he after that? When he's kind of untethered from that past event.
For sure, yeah. There's so many possibilities, and I think what's exciting about this right now is knowing that it is far more serialized than the Trek shows we've had so far, is that there is actually a very different set of potential to everything that's introduced. When we watched the first TNG, it's like, okay, these characters have potential, there's ideas for stories, but all of the good episodes, we probably, maybe we could have predicted them if we just sat and thought of a bunch of ideas, but it wasn't because they were seeded back at the start. Whereas this feels like it's actually seeding things. It's like, these are the building blocks that you're going to be playing with over the course of your show.
Yeah, and it's why in a lot of ways this feels a lot more modern.
Yeah.
Than perhaps TNG does, despite its maybe more dated visuals because of they're not remastering it.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that dated. I just call it low quality.
Dated in comparison to the treatment that we were used to with TNG. But I think in its writing sensibilities, it certainly feels a lot closer to modern TV.
It feels like it's poking at big ideas, and I appreciate that.
It feels a lot closer to kind of that late 2000s network TV feel, right?
Yeah, I can see that.
Kind of once you're into that like Lost era of kind of that sort of semi-serialized, where it's all ongoing, but there's still like standalone things as well. That era of TV, it feels like this kind of slots in there, which it's definitely ahead of its time in that regard.
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, the only sort of counterpoint I'd make to that is like this and B5 were in at the same time, and they were both doing it, and so clearly this was a turning point in the 90s, and and to an extent, other shows like like stuff like Buffy did start. I mean, obviously had a lot of individual episodes, but it did have these serialized plots, and a lot of shows in the mid 90s did have that, where you'd have a lot of Freak of the Weeks, as we called them back in the day, but you'd have these season-long plot arcs as well and things like that. obviously there's degrees to it, and I would say from having watched Babylon 5 is definitely more serialized shows than anything else I've seen in the 90s. I'm kind of expecting Deep Space Nine to be either on par with it or slightly less serialized, just because it's a Star Trek show. But I don't know if that's just my own expectations.
Right, it's hard to say, and we'll know more after we've seen a little bit more of it. And this is something that it could evolve as it goes on, where season 3 might be significantly more serialized than season 1.
Yeah, a good example of this is Fringe season 1, super freak of the week style storytelling, and then you hit about halfway through season 2 and it starts to go serialized, and then once you hit season 3 it's like 80% serialized, and then once you hit later on, like, you're almost doing all serialized with the odd standalone episode.
And I can see this kind of fitting into that mold already.
I can see that, yeah.
And I'm not opposed to that at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to compare it to Babylon 5 just one more time, and I'll try not to do this too often, but this is just because I'm talking about expectations. Season 1 of Babylon 5 is pretty story of the week, but a lot of the stories of the week in season 1 kind of set up things that are used later. So it's actually used to set up a lot of different little things that are then going to be used by characters or conflicts later on. If not to just give you some backstory on a character, say, in an episode, which is obviously a very traditional TV thing to do. So I'm kind of expecting that in season 1.
I am as well, or at least hoping for that. I think it's something where episodes 2 and 3 might be more interesting to me than the first one, because the first one, it's always inherently more kind of engaging with these things, whereas 2 and 3 is like, okay, now I see what it's actually going to be doing on a week-to-week basis, at least at this point of its life. And that'll tell me a lot more about what to expect for at least the next season or 2, I think.
But do you think this was a successful premiere?
I do, yeah. I don't think it's perfect by any means, but I think it definitely achieves its purpose of, like, okay, let's get you interested, establish that it's different from other Trek shows, and and kind of set up, these are the core ideas that we're going to be playing with. I think it succeeds in all of that for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. Core ideas, but also just the core group of characters. I think most of them come out of this sounding quite interesting in their own ways. Like, certainly, like, maybe not the Doctor dude, but like, I would say Odo's super interesting. We see him like actually
interesting just because he's so different, right?
Yeah, we find out at one point he can literally disguise himself as like a bag, and then he melts into himself. Like, so
it definitely feels like he is the Data of the show, right?
Yeah. But obviously he's kind of like the Data, but with an attitude that's closer to, like, I don't know, a little bit of Worf, but a little bit he's got an angrier, like, by the book kind of attitude.
Very lawful good.
Yeah. Dax, Terry Farrell's character, she seems pretty interesting. The idea that she's actually this really old being in, like, an attractive woman's body, that's one of the first things that's brought up with her, is that the guy's asking her out and she's like, yeah, sure. And Sisko's like, aren't you a bit old for him? And he's like, well, I'm 28, he's 27. 728 maybe.
Yeah.
So whatever the line was, something like that.
I do like, she's got, like, a good presence so far, I would say, but I don't have a lot to her yet. I think that kind of goes for everyone on this episode outside of Sisko, where I get just enough to go, okay, yeah, okay. I see
sure, yeah.
The framing of a character, but nothing else really there yet, which isn't a critique.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, though, is that all these characters have something. They all have, like, an interesting breadcrumb. Kira, I think, has, like, at first, like, she was just kind of angry and yelling, but as the episode went on, I thought she had a lot of good little moments. There's a great moment with when she's trying to bluff with the Cardassians when they're threatening to fire on the station, and she's like, "Red alert! Raise shields!" And O'Brien just turns and goes, "What shields?" And, like, the look she has on her face after he says that actually kind of gave me a good chuckle. It was good, and it's not because it's not supposed to have shields, just because all the systems are down, and so on and so on. And even the fact that she makes them, like, can we move it? And he's like, it's not a starship. Like, it has some basic thrusters for, things, but not for long distance travel.
Yeah, I mean, like, it could get there, just very slowly.
Yeah. So they pull it. I feel like it's staying where it is now, though. I feel like it's going to stay next to where the wormhole is.
Yeah, which I think is interesting. Like, because it starts as, oh, wherever, Bajor, it's like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. I still think they're relatively close to Berger, though.
I think so. They mentioned even going slowly, like it was going to take them, I think this is like 2 months to get to where it would have been.
But and then in the grand scheme of space, that's not a long time.
No. I think it's a pretty short trip with proper, warp engines. It's like nothing.
Yeah, well, I think the shuttles they take out to go there individually don't have warp in them, and they're just like they can just go faster on impulse.
Yeah. They've just got proper engines on them.
Yeah. Because I don't think Deep Space Nine, the station, has impulse in the same way that the Enterprise does. I think it's just...
Yeah, it is very basic. Because it's a space station. It's not designed. You stick it in orbit and that's it. I'm
basically imagining a few fire extinguishers just like rigged around the outside. All right, we've got us moving at, what's that? A mile every 3 hours. Okay, right.
That'll do. We'll get there.
We'll keep going. Quark seems funny. He's obviously Ferengi. I've got kind of a character type that we're familiar with, so it'll be kind of interesting to have one that we get to know over time, and maybe get a bit more depth with as time goes on.
I think depth is going to be something important because Ferengi have been very one note, and I kind of groan a lot of the time when they show up.
Okay, yeah.
And not because I hate them or anything, but just more like, okay, it's Ferengi, and I know what to expect, right? I think if you're having one as a regular main character, it can't be just, oh, it's a Ferengi, right? There's got to be more to it.
I feel like it'll be that for a little while, and then you'll get an episode somewhere down the line that's going to evolve him a bit.
Hopefully sooner rather than later, I would say.
Yeah.
Or at least they do little things here or there early on just to make him unique, I would say.
Yeah. I think that even the idea that they trick the Cardassians by coming up with this ruse of having Odo turn into a bag and say, no, you can't gamble in here now, so take your winnings and go. The idea that they have someone sneak on their ships to sabotage their ships so they can't see that Sisko's flying off to the wormhole is definitely showing you that he's playing by different rules than what Picard and the Enterprise do. He's willing to do a little shadier tactic here or there.
Yeah, little ops, as they refer to them.
Yeah. So, be interested to see kind of how they push the envelope in that way further, as well as things go on. But super intrigued by Lars. Obviously, O'Brien is like we already like him, so he doesn't have to impress us.
I feel like we have a lot less to say because, it's O'Brien.
Yeah. It's nice. I like how he names drop his wife, though, just in case someone's watching this that hasn't watched Next Gen. He mentions he has a wife just so that when she pops up later, it won't be out of the blue.
It'll make sense.
Yeah. I did like, actually, when they come in and Sisko's son Jake is complaining that the food replicator's not working, there's not really a bed, there's nothing there. And O'Brien's like offering, like, oh, we've got some rations. we can bring this some rations.
It's like, they're shit, but you can eat them.
Yeah, Sisko's like, we have to rough it for a little bit, all right, until things get up and running. Just have to go with it, Jake. Promise me. Dear. So, I mean, as far as setting up its themes and setting up its characters goes, this was a pretty solid first step. I mean, I would say this is better than Next Gen's first two-parter.
Yeah, I pretty agree with that.
Encounter at Farpoint. I think this is a better... And don't get me wrong, that introduced Q, but Q didn't really get good until he showed up again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas I would say this is probably the most intriguing first episode of a Trek show that I've seen thus far.
It's such a hard one to judge in that the other Trek shows have, even Next Gen, have been starting from like a blank slate, right? So they've got to do everything from scratch. Whereas this here, it feels like, no, it's got a big head start because it's got a lot of these ideas that we've been playing with in TNG. We've already introduced the Cardassian stuff, so we don't have to spend as much time as you would do normally introducing that from scratch. Like, a lot of the groundwork's been laid for us.
There's not a lot of... They don't have to explain everything up front. I'm sure they'll still drop things here or there so anyone can catch up and like get it from context and like get all the details after a few episodes. But certainly, if you've been watching Next Gen, you can kind of hit the ground running with this in a way that you couldn't before. Yeah,
and you've got that pre-established interest in things like that, that confrontation between the Bajorans and Cardassians, having O'Brien, a character that over the last 5.5 seasons. It's like, oh yeah, we've grown to see him more and more regularly, and grown to like. And then so he doesn't actually have a lot to do in this episode because they know they don't need to, because most of the audience at this point, they're like, yeah, they're confident, yeah, they already know who he is, they like him already, we can spend less time on him.
But that said, I do love that him and Picard get a one-on-one scene to say goodbye.
Oh, goodbye, yeah.
Well, it's nice because he's like going to speak to Picard, and then he decides to want. He's like, nah, I won't do it. I want to have the goodbye. And then Picard actually runs to the transporter room because he wants to say goodbye. And
he's the one that beams him off.
It's kind of sweet, yeah. It's something really nice about O'Brien saying to Picard, "Energize," because it's usually the other way around. And Picard says something like, I've accidentally said O'Brien when I called this room a couple of days, because he's already been Deep Space Nine for a couple of days, for the sounds of it. And he's I don't know. There was just like this look they exchanged, because I thought they were actually going to say the words goodbye or it's been an honor or something, typical thing. But they just kind of have this look, and he beams off. I thought it was sweet.
No, I did as well. It was nice to have. It's weird having that in this show and not having that goodbye in TNG, right? Where that's where the bulk of that relationship's been.
Do you know, I actually think you get away with it in a weird way, because while O'Brien was featured often enough, he did regularly go multiple episodes without appearing. So it's kind of this cake and eating it too scenario where he feels important enough that it's cool that he's now a main character on this show, but he wasn't there all the time on TNG, so it doesn't feel like a big, huge absence that he's not there now either.
Yeah, it's definitely also probably the most glaring scene where, if for some reason this was where you decided to start Trek, where this scene kind of feels like, yeah, okay, whatever, sure, who cares?
Yeah, that's fair. I think in the context of having this shared world where you're spinning off into your own show, and I'm saying this in 2022 when I am sick to death of all these shared universes and spin-offs and like franchise shit, I think it's okay in this context to have a couple of scenes like this. And I think because all of Picard's other scenes are more tied to what Sisko's going through in Sisko's past, none of those feel like they're there for just the sake of it. This is the only one that's kind of like it's a handoff of O'Brien. It's Picard saying, this is you get to go off into this show now, this is a goodbye. This is one for people who have watched Next Gen. So it's true, if you're only watching Deep Space Nine and you've never seen Next Gen, this one scene will mean nothing to you, but it is only one scene. And it's,
I agree. That's what I said. It's just this one scene that feels, I don't want to say out of place, because that feels harsher than I mean it to be, but it feels noticeably different than the rest.
Do you know what I think it does, though, in a positive light, is that it gives... Because sometimes when these kind of things happen and you can't... Because, you felt it a little bit in the bridge, right? Where why is there not a single other character from Next Gen that we normally see on the bridge? It's all a bunch of, like, extras, right? There's no one. It's not... Riker's not sitting there. It's not even, like, Troy sitting at the chair.
They're on a sleep shift.
Right? And it's because we're on a different show and they're not going to pay those actors to be on this episode. They're paying one. They're paying Picard or Patrick Stewart. And that's why you have this disconnect. I think having Picard there to sort of whether it was in this show or in Next Gen, I think this legitimizes the transition of O'Brien in a way that otherwise it would just kind of feel like, oh, sudden, and they never mention it on Next Gen, and they might never mention it on Next Gen, but it's okay now because we had this scene.
I still think I would like a mention on Next Gen, not like I don't want a recreation of this scene or anything.
No,
I don't want another goodbye, but I would like them acknowledgement.
What if Picard says O'Brien by accident when he goes out the transporter?
Oh, that'd be like too perfect, though. They wouldn't have done that.
That is perfect. They may not do that, but it would be perfect.
That would be, yeah.
Yeah. That'd be cool. I guess they don't want to make people watching Next Gen feel bad that O'Brien's not there. Even though it would sell the other show. And hey, go watch Deep Space Nine too.
Yeah, just like I say, I don't want a lot, and we've had characters just disappear before, especially smaller characters. I would hope there is just some acknowledgement that he's gone on TNG.
I'd say your odds are about 41. If I was to ballpark the odds, I'd say you've got about 41 chance that they'll mention him.
Oh, we'll see. So, hopefully in the next handful of episodes.
Yeah, so that's cool. But yeah, I did like at the end of the episode they showed they've got like a two like floor set, because it's sort of like it shows the characters walking off down the sort of the main hallway, and it goes up and there's like a walkway above it that's also got people walking on it. So it's like, okay, they've built a nice fancy set here where there's like two layers to it, and they can do like shots looking down at the walkway and things like that. That's kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah, we saw some. Was promenade? Was that the word?
Promenade. Oh, that sounds right. That sounds right.
It just popped into my head. Oh, I thought maybe.
It definitely began with a P. Like I know it began with a P.
Yeah, but they made a point of showing some of the sets, right? Like that. The offices.
The main sort of command deck, or whatever they're calling it.
Yeah.
It's not technically a bridge because it's not a ship, but
headquarters.
Yeah. I like some of the mythology behind that as well, because they mentioned, like the leader's office is like right behind, but up elevated above the command deck, because it's like they're above everyone who works for them. Not because
everyone has to look up at them.
Yeah, and that's like Cardassian, like like feng shui
architecture.
Yeah, that's how they see it. Whereas it's like, okay, we're taking it over, so now this is just what we're doing now. But like, yeah, okay, so there's a reason for these things. I like the thought that's went into some of this, because even just that on its own, if you hadn't watched TNG or you'd forgotten all about the Cardassians, that immediately tells you something about them. Like you're getting stuff, you're understanding them a little bit better. So that's also very cool. Yeah, I don't really have a lot to honestly criticize. Really, I mean, there's little imperfections here or there. There's there's things that you could say, maybe little performance moments where, okay, the actors haven't quite settled into the role yet, or quite nailed what they're going to be. But like certainly as far as pilots go, I think this one's pretty solid actually.
I do as well. I think it's when I'm talking complaints, it'll be things like the pacing of stuff like the orbs, where I don't hate it. It's not terrible, but it's significantly more by the numbers. Just this is the MacGuffin, right? And it's fine, but it feels like a MacGuffin compared to a lot of the other pretty grounded writing that's going on around it.
Yeah, the idea of the orbs is, these orbs came down, informed the religion that the Bajorans have. The Cardassians have taken all but one of them, and not because they left it behind intentionally, because they didn't realize there was one missing, or there was one extra.
There's maybe a temple to return them all to. Yeah,
which is kind of what Sisko's told to look for. And whenever he's near it, he gets like, it's almost like he's living in a flashback, right, where it goes into his head. And then that's kind of what happens when he actually meets these aliens. One of maybe the interesting details that they might play with again, actually, is so it's him and Dax who go on this trip, and they send Dax back. They don't want to deal with her. They just want to talk to Sisko. There's a really cool shot here, actually. I thought was really unique for Star Trek, at least from what I've seen so far. Is like when his like face is just in the white light, and you just sort of get this almost a creepy just image of just like the eyes and the mouth and the nose coming out of this white bright light. It was kind of a surreal kind of thing. But before that happens though, and they both get off the little shuttle, there's this interesting idea that they're both seeing completely different planets, because like whatever technology this or even just how their time works, perhaps maybe they're seeing it at different times. Like they're Sisko's seeing it when it was like lush and full of green and all this,
all the way around.
Oh, around. So yeah, he sees the dead rock with storms and stuff.
Yeah,
and she's seeing the forest and the grass and the flowers.
Paradise, essentially. Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a time thing or if it's just like, no, this is just they're both seeing something different that they're expecting.
Yeah, I don't like. You could take it as the time thing, especially as what we learn. I think because that's before we learn that they're non-linear. My assumption at that point was this is their projections. This is their kind of what they would like to see, right? They're bringing their own expectations with them.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe like to see is not quite the way I'd say it. Expectations is maybe a better phrase. Or maybe it's like a representation. Maybe it's like the idea is that Dax is actually quite content with themselves. Whereas Sisko, as is pointed out as this goes on, like he's stuck in this place of misery because he can't get over the death of his wife and he's still there. So this is like just like a visual representation of what his psyche looks like right now.
Yeah.
So it could be that. Yeah, there's a few things it could kind of be.
It's something that might never get answered. It might never even get addressed again. But I kind of hope they get into it at some point.
I honestly don't know if it'll be answered per se, but I think just this idea or like the cause of it will come up again. Does that make sense?
The question will be raised. Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. So probably when we're directly dealing with these alien this higher life form that operates in a different wavelength to us. Yeah,
and we still need to learn kind of what went down with them and Cisco after we left them.
I have a good feeling that that'll come up.
Oh, I do as well. That's definitely something that will be explored in the probably not too distant future.
That I can see that being a big mid-season episode, like your big mid-season, not finale, because I don't know if there's a break per se, but like,
Yeah.
I don't think it'll be like the next couple of episodes, but I think there'll be a big episode down the line that's going to have flashbacks to.
It is a sort of thing where I can see them maybe being prodded at in the next couple of episodes by other characters asking, kind of like, hey, what happened in there? But I don't think we get the answer straight away.
Yeah, because it's soon after he's explaining things like pleasure, because they don't understand pleasure. They don't understand, because in one of the flashbacks, him and his wife kiss, and like obviously like the aliens are kind of playing the parts of the other characters, and then she sort of like looks at her hand and touches her lips. She's like, what's this? And he's like, oh, touching, like it can be a source of pleasure, and like pleasure is like happy feelings. So he's trying his best to explain it. So yeah, it's interesting. And then you get into some sort of possibly uplifting ideas. This idea that this species like saw enough good and hope in Cisco ultimately when they looked hard enough, and he was able to sort of like get the better parts of humanity across to them, that this actually did inspire them to make this choice to let him go back and like at the very least try to understand better and like maybe want to learn more about them over time. So and there's definitely something in Babylon 5 I can compare this to. I don't want to spoil things though, so I'm just going to say that I can see a parallel to something. Sure. And just leave it at that. But very intriguing. So very good first episode, I'd say. I am aware that this is another one that's apparently it gets proper good after a few seasons. Like it's like I think I've heard season 4 onwards is like what makes it everyone's favorite, or not everyone, but a lot of people's favorite. So which is not to say that I'm expecting misery for the first like 3 seasons, but just to have reserved expectations and sort of treat it as it comes, and but I like this stuff.
If it's kind of anything on par with this for a couple of seasons, I'd still be happy with that.
Oh yeah, I think I can see why this is some people's favorites just from this first episode. Not that I think it's there yet for me by any means, but if this fulfills the sort of serialized, serious promise that it's kind of like putting down for Star Trek, I could see it end up being my favorite if it hits those.
I can as well, but even aside from the serialized angle, just the tone that this takes for this episode is very different, and that alone, just assuming it sticks with that tone, I can see why that would be enough to be some people's favorite.
Yeah, without feeling like it's betraying the world that it's supposed to be set in. It feels like just a more darker, more mature corner than what we've seen, but it still feels like the same world.
Yeah, and that's not to say that the other Trek has been immature.
Oh no.
This just feels less all ages, I guess.
Yeah, and it's not that Next Gen never like poses harder questions. We've praised episodes that they don't give you an easy answer when it's a harder question that's been asked, but this feels like the entire nature of the show is going to be posing big hard questions that aren't easy to answer, and that's going to be the entire fabric. Whereas Next Gen will do it every few episodes, but there's a lot of just fun, silly episodes, and there's.
And that's not to say one approach is inherently better or worse than the other.
No,
it's entirely taste, and just your own preferences as to what you want to consume.
Assuming the quality is equal.
Yes, assuming that. Of course.
Yeah. But I'm excited to see more. So the way the schedule for this works out is that. So the hope is, and we may not hit it every week, but the hope is that once both shows are technically, quote unquote, airing at the same time, we will be having 2 treks a week. Ideally, it'll be one of each, but depending on what the schedule was when they originally came out, we know that after a chunk of like back and forth 1-to-1s, there's actually like 2 Deep Space Nine and 2 Next Gen and 2 Deep Space Nine. It does that for a little bit, but there's a few Deep Space Nine on its own, so we're going to do those just one a week, and that takes us up to episode 5 of Deep Space Nine, and then at that point they start alternating, and we're hoping that at that point we can have one of each out every week. As best to our abilities. Obviously, occasionally, if we have to slow down a little bit and then speed back up, that may happen. But that is definitely going to be the goal, just so that we're getting through it at a reasonable pace. But
yeah, we don't want to be here forever.
Yeah, but next week we'll be back with episodes. See, I don't know what you call it. Do I call it episode 3? Do I call it episode 2?
What does IMDb call it?
Good question.
Because that's what you're going to refer to, let's be honest, when you're talking about next episodes and stuff like that.
IMDb calls it episode 2.
Well, let's go with that then.
Okay, so we're going with IMDb's logic here. Even though technically, if you're looking at production like listings and things, this was 1 and 2. But okay, so we'll call the next one episode 2. I'm going to have to look around though, because when I'm naming it for like the YouTube title, like I'm going to kind of want to want whatever most people call it for searchability's sake.
If this is what IMDb is using, I suspect this is what the majority end up using. Probably.
I'll have a look around though, just in case.
Yeah.
But we'll see. But cool. So I'll do what I do at the end of next gen. Unless it starts feeling weird if it's too serialized at a certain point. But at least for now, I'll give you a title and a IMDb synopsis, because why not? So episode 2 is called Past Prologue, and the description is as follows on IMDb. Tanalos, a former Bajoran terrorist during the occupation, asked Cisco for asylum on Deep Space. This is already sounding so much more serious and stuff. Meanwhile, the station's last Cardassian inhabitant, Garrick, possibly a former spy for the Cardassian government, proves to be an interesting mystery to Dr. Bashir. So Dr. Bashir's got a bit of more of a subplot this time, so that, I guess that makes sense, given he probably got the least in this first episode.
It does, and then we'll probably rotate through some of them kind of over the next few to kind of like learn to get to know them a bit better.
That makes a lot of sense. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, sounds interesting. I am color me intrigued, curious, and I don't know, slightly aroused, I guess. Oh. Anyway, that's our first Deep Space Nine discussion. Hopefully you've been enjoying us on this journey since the original series. If not, go back and check out those playlists, and hopefully you enjoyed embarking on the journey with us now. The purpose of these is just 2 nerds in the present day watching some classic science fiction that we've heard about but have never seen, and working through and giving our thoughts from our own perspectives. So here we are. So let us know what you think of the premiere episode of Deep Space Nine in the comments. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, all that stuff. You can support all the content, all the reviews, by hitting the super thanks button on YouTube, or going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and supporting us over there for as little as $1 per month, which helps keep all the content coming. Some of the content gets early access at the $5 tier, including the Star Trek reviews. You get it about 6-7 days early. So go and have a look if you want to do that. And otherwise, that is pretty much us. So thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching Star Trek. I already like this Cisco more than the one on The Flash. And I know it's spelled differently. It doesn't matter. The joke works.